We have people, I'm seeing some more people in the waiting room, so we'll just let's trickle in this morning. And we'll get started at 9:02. All righty. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us this morning. My name is Abby Edwards, and I am the Adaptation Planning Grant Program Manager on OPR's Integrated Climate Resiliency and Adaptation Program team. I'm joined by my teammates, Brandon, Taylor, and Sarah. We're also joined by Luigi, who is from the Department of Water Resources, and here to provide an overview of the grant portal. Also, we have Sarah on the team supporting tech. So if you have any questions or challenges, please feel free to reach out to her. So as we begin this workshop, we acknowledge where we are calling in from. We at the Office of Planning and Research join you all from Sacramento, California, on ancestral Musinan tribal land, territory of the Southern Maidu, the Valley Miwok, and Patwin people. We thank them for their stewardship of these lands for thousands of years. If you're up for it, can you please share your name, organization, and where you're calling in from in the chat? That would be great. So for today's session, Brandon and I are going to trade off walking through the Adaptation Planning Grant Program. As you all know, we released the program guidelines for public comment on the 28th, and they are live on our website. And we're going to share the link with you, link for the guidelines in the chat. And we'll start by giving everyone a reminder of the program background, and then we'll walk through the main sections of the guidelines that we're seeking feedback on. And then once we walk through the guidelines, if time allows, we're going to create optional breakout rooms for folks to hop into, either ask us questions or make comments on the guidelines. And we plan to break today at 10. And then if you need additional time to develop your comments, we have several other ways to engage that we'll share at the end. I'll also note that we are recording this session to share with folks after the workshop. So with that, I will hand it over to Brandon to give a broad program overview. Brandon?
Thanks, Abby. Hi there, everyone. Thanks for being here with us today. I'd like to start off with a brief recap of our outreach and engagement efforts conducted thus far. Throughout the spring of this year, the ICARP team conducted a statewide series of virtual workshops and interviews where we asked participants 6 primary questions centered on the Adaptation Planning Grant Program's vision, program design, eligible activities, and eligible organizations. Key priorities for participants, among others, were to meet the organizational needs of applicants through eligible costs and activities, connecting planning grant activities to implementation funding, and increase accessibility of the grant application process. And we'll add a link to the engagement summary in the chat now. Thanks, Taylor. Current state law requires that considerations for climate change and associated risk be integrated into general plans, climate adaptation plans, local coastal programs, and further incentives to integrate adaptation into local and multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plans. These plans guide the development of long-term community vision, infrastructure investments, community health and safety, emergency response and hazard mitigation, as well as economic development. Through direct funding, the Adaptation Planning Grant Program will support local, regional, and tribal adaptation planning efforts throughout California. Next slide, please. The 2021 climate budget included $25 million for the creation of the Adaptation Planning Grant Program. Through ICARP, the Adaptation Planning Grant funding will aim to fill local, regional, and tribal planning needs, provide communities the resources to identify climate resilience priorities, and furthermore, the APGP will support the development of a pipeline of climate resilience infrastructure projects across the state. This funding will be appropriated in 3 rounds, and OPR anticipates administering subsequent funding rounds over the next few years. Next slide, please. The Adaptation Planning Grant Program, or APGP, I'm sort of using the two synchronously, but has several program goals, and those goals include to support equitable outcomes and wide geographic and economic diversity in applicants, support much needed integrated infrastructure planning to achieve community resilience, to help communities plan for and respond to multiple climate risks by supporting an all-risk approach. For example, providing flexible funding to conduct integrated planning activities that intersect with climate risks, such as land use, transportation, housing, natural resource management, public infrastructure, and hazard mitigation issues. And lastly, to build community planning and capacity by supporting peer-to-peer learning, information sharing, and publishing replicable case studies on the State Adaptation Clearinghouse. Here's a view of our tentative timeline. You can see here the public comment period opened this past Wednesday on September 28th and will extend 1 month until October 28th. Applications will start being accepted on November 7th, and applicants will have 45 days until December 16th to submit their applications and associated materials. Hopefully this gives folks ample time before the holidays to complete their applications. And with that, I'll hand it back to Abby.
Thanks, Brandon. And thanks everyone who's continuing to join. So now that you have a refresher on the program background, I will turn to eligible applicants. And if you happen to be following along in the PDF of the guidelines, we're now on page 7. So eligible applicants may include, but are not limited to, local public entities. And there's a long list of what qualifies as a public entity on page 7. California Native American tribes, including federally and non-federally recognized tribes or tribal serving organizations, disadvantaged unincorporated communities, and community-based organizations, which may include nonprofits, philanthropic organizations, non-governmental organizations, and other organizations with a demonstrated history of representing vulnerable communities. I'm seeing a question in the chat that I'll just address really quickly. We are hoping that the guidelines will be finalized and the application released November 7th. So diving a little bit deeper on the eligibility requirements, in addition to the eligible applicant criteria on the previous slide, we're also encouraging co-applicants. So for a little bit more detail there should be a minimum of 1 co-applicant partnering with the lead applicant on the application. And either the lead applicant or one of the co-applicants should be a public entity. And if public entity support is not feasible, applicants are required to submit a justification to explain why. And furthermore, while applicants are strongly encouraged to include robust, diverse, multi-stakeholder partnerships in their applications, that's not always possible for some communities. So in such instances, the applicants should explain why partnership is not feasible at the time of the application, and outline a plan to build out the partnerships. We'll note that priority in scoring will be given to applications that can demonstrate strong, diverse, multi-stakeholder partnerships or plans to establish such partnerships in their planning approach. And we'll go over in more detail the scoring criteria in a couple of slides. So moving on to eligible activities. Eligible adaptation planning activities were derived from our spring 2022 public feedback that Brandon mentioned, and are structured around the 2020 California Adaptation Planning Guide, which outlines a 4-phase planning process that communities can use to plan for climate change. We're going to share a link of the Adaptation Planning Guide for reference if it's not a resource that you're familiar with. The 4 phases from the planning guide are shown on this slide. So like the planning guide, the eligible activities section is designed to be flexible, meeting community needs wherever they may be in the planning process. And while the examples of eligible activities are outlined in phases, please note that the eligible projects can occur at any stage of the planning framework. This structure will help communities align their project with statewide guidance, resources, examples, and tools. And additionally, equity and community engagement are integrated throughout all phases and should be considered for all proposed activities. I'm seeing also another question in the chat from Jeff around partnerships and on a regional scale. And this program, the Adaptation Planning Grant Program, which is different from the Regional Resilience Planning and Implementation Grant Program out of ICARP, does not have a similar regional focus. And so that's not as heavily emphasized with this program. So for activities, some activities, tasks, project components, etc., are not eligible under this grant program, such as implementation of construction projects, including direct and indirect construction costs, initiation documents, engineering plans and design specification work, capital costs or maintenance costs, and also environmental studies, plans, or documents normally required for project development under CEQA or NEPA. So moving along, for the application itself, planning grants will be evaluated and awarded through a competitive process. Applicants will submit applications electronically through the Department of Water Resources grant portal, along with the application materials. And we'll have Reggie walk through that portal, just a brief overview to give you a little look at it a little bit later on in this presentation. And then each applicant will be assessed for its ability to address all scoring criteria that we will walk through in the next slide. And additional documentation beyond just the application questions will include a budget, a work plan, and 3 letters of support. So next, I'll walk through the scoring criteria. And if you are following along in the guidelines, this is on page 16. So each application should describe the project in detail along 8 specific scoring criteria. The first scoring criteria is project vision and worth 10 points. The vision statement should conceptualize the collective goals, objectives, and aspirations of the proposed project. And the vision should align with ICARP's vision and the Adaptation Planning Grant goals that were outlined earlier in slide 6. The additional criteria, the next criteria, project objectives, worth 10 points, will ask applicants to describe how their project's proposed planning activities will address the program objectives. Next, the community needs and priority criteria, that's worth 20 points, will ask applicants to demonstrate how they will identify community needs and prioritize their projects based on the feasibility of meeting those needs. The co-benefits criteria, which is worth 10 points, will ask We'll ask applicants to demonstrate how their proposed planning activities provide climate mitigation co-benefits, which can range from social equity to environmental co-benefits. For example, planning activities and incorporating nature-based solutions can reduce a range of climate risks while also providing public health and safety co-benefits. The adapted capacity criteria, also worth 10 points, asks applicants to explain how the proposed project will enhance the community's capacity to adjust to potential damage, take advantage of opportunities, or respond to consequences from climate change. The community partnership criteria, worth 10 points, will measure the strength of the applicant's partnership or evaluate the justification for the lack of partnership. For the organization capacity criteria, which is worth 10 points, applicants should explain their readiness and capacity to execute the proposed work on time and within budget. And lastly, the budget, which is worth 20 points, should provide a written explanation of budget allocations, describing the details and rationale for the proposed expenditures. So I'll just note that there's a lot more detail on the scoring criteria listed in the guidelines on page 16 for your reference. I'm now going to hand it back over to Brandon to talk through some of the program elements, technical assistance, and fund availability.
Thanks, Abby. Grantees and their partners should use the beginning of the grant term to develop an action plan. An action plan will specify key activities, identify roles and responsibilities of applicants and their partners, and also establish timelines to successfully accomplish particular activities outlined in their work plan previously. Further, we ask that grantees incorporate evaluation activities into their scope of work, including progress reporting and case study development. ICARP staff will provide technical assistance in the application development, project development, implementation, and evaluation of projects. Unfortunately, third-party technical assistance is not currently available for the applicants to the Adaptation Planning Grant Program. In subsequent rounds, the APGP and ICARP intend to allocate additional funding to provide third-party technical assistance providers to assist with the application development, as well as implementation and evaluation. All awarded grantees will receive implementation technical assistance from ICARP program staff, as well as other state and federal agencies, and other possible third-party entities throughout the grant term. These are listed in the guidelines, but they include peer-to-peer learning, climate adaptation visioning, integrated plan alignment, climate impacts, vulnerability and risk, climate adaptation strategies and actions, as well as pathways to additional funding. Abby, did I miss anything? Is that covering it? Or do you have any additions?
Yeah, that's great.
Great. OPR will award $6,600,000 in fiscal year 2022 through 2023. Sorry if that was a mouthful. The number's right there in the first bullet. Grant awards will cover a total term of 30 months. We anticipate that the application submission period will begin in November 2022 and close by December 16th, 2022. The minimum grant award is $25,000 and the maximum grant award will be $600,000. The anticipated grant agreement start date is April 1st of 2023. We've also set funding targets, and OPR's ability to allocate funding for the adaptation planning grant is governed by authority granted to us by statute. And so we chose to implement a system of funding targets that prioritizes tribal applicants and other vulnerable communities rather than funding set-asides, which many folks may be more familiar with, because they fall within a statutory authority to implement the program, while also addressing concerns raised by members of the public in listening sessions. So we are trying to address the specific needs of these specific communities through funding targets. And you can see more information on that in the guideline, the draft guidelines themselves. No match funding will be required so far. And anything else, Abby, to add to?
Yeah, I think you covered it, and I definitely encourage folks to look through that section of the guidelines and provide us with.
Great, thank you. Next slide, please. So eligible costs, we're really asking folks to consider the eligible cost section as they're drafting their budget as they're applying and drafting their proposed budget. These specific activities are going to be one, sort of a response to a lot of the engagement we heard in the engagement summary, so that we're trying to be as flexible and to cover as many potential costs as possible, while also encouraging costs in different areas that may not have been previously assumed. So we're looking to fund staff costs, program meetings, workshop attendance, travel costs, language access, evaluation activities, administrative costs associated with their project proposals, engagement outreach, education and training, as well as new partnerships. We really want folks to consider setting aside funding in their budget to incorporate new voices, new partners as they embark on their 30-month journey. And so we've actually added that as an eligible cost as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Leiji, who will give us an overview of the grants portal.
Thanks, Brando. Let me share my screen. Yeah, the program will use Department of Water Resources grants review and tracking system called GRANT. It's in guideline page 24. Here is a link. If you click the link, you are going to here. That's a DWR's grants main page. On the right side, there's a grants login. If you click, and then here is the main page, the simple design. If you are not an existing user, you need to register. Here's a registration. You go into here. You type in the necessary information. Let me try an example and then go to next. Then you select your organization. Here is a whole list of different organizations here. If your organization is not here, you can add a new one and then type in the information and save it. After that, let me switch to my existing users. For example, here you log in. So you can see the main page. On the left, there's a new solicitations. Right now, this is the production page. So for DWR, there are 3 new solicitations available. And this one, this ICARP, this one will be here after we put all the information into the system. And from here, you can start your proposal. I think that's it. Any questions?
Thank you, Reggie. And we'll also, during the application period, we will also be going into a little bit more depth with the DWR and this portal to help folks navigate the application portal if there are any questions. So thank you for the overview. It's really helpful.
Yes, there will be staff support for during the whole application.
Yeah, great. And from my experience, John and Reggie have been very responsive to all of our questions so far. So I really appreciate it. So next, so now that we've gone through some of the guidelines, I'll share how to go about submitting a public comment. As shown on this slide, you can email us at icarp.grants@opr.ca.gov. You can make a comment in the breakouts that will start here in a bit. We'll also circulate a survey after this workshop to collect feedback that way. And then also you can mail your comments to OPR. So lastly, we have a few engagement opportunities over the course of the next month. We have this workshop, an overview. We have another overview at the ICARP Technical Advisory Council meeting, and then workshops for rural and tribal communities. And we're also planning to potentially do a joint workshop with the Department of Transportation's Adaptation Planning Grant Program to ensure that we are clearly communicating the distinctions between the programs and the similarities. So if folks would like to see that happen, please email me and let me know. And with that, we're going to now move over to breakout rooms. So I'm going to stop recording.